No, it's absolutely right. And remember, Odessa was a Greek city to a very large extent. And the trading was, Greek traders, of course, Armenian traders, Jewish traders. These networks of trade were extensive. And you're absolutely correct that everybody knows each other extremely well. The Turks and the Greeks, of course, they know each other. Everybody knows each other. And I was actually just had the pleasure of having a long discussion with the Orthodox Patriarch of Antioch, which goes back to, I don't remember whether it's the 1st century AD or the 2nd century AD. He's a Christian patriarch in Damascus, in an Aramaic-speaking community, for heaven's sake. This is 2,000 years. And, of course, we were discussing exactly this wonderful mix of local cultures in Syria. And Barack Obama sends in the CIA in 2012 to overthrow Assad, lights the match, blows up the place, not knowing anything about Syria, about its history, about its culture, about its diversity, just lighting the match. And so I think it's a fascinating thing, and it's really worth contemplating. I can think of let's consider 3 great empires of this region. First, the Persian Empire, going back the Achaemenid Empire of Cyrus the Great, who, by the way, saved the Jewish people. He allowed the exiles from Babylonia to return to Jerusalem. And the idea of that Iran and and Israel are natural enemies is fatuous, given that the actual history of the two goes back to the 6th century BC, close relations. But what I was going to say about the Persians, they were very clever. They allowed local rule, local religions, and a huge diversity. And so actually the Jewish Second Temple period in today's Israel, but back in the 4th and 3rd century was under the suzerainty of Persia, because it was a very tolerant system. Then came Alexander the Great's conquests between 331 and 323 BC. And of course, he reached India, created the Hellenistic empires. But his genius, even as this kid, although he had the greatest teacher in history, in my view, Aristotle, but Alexander knew, take local traditions, don't try to impose things, let things be. And so the Hellenistic kingdoms, of course, brought wonderful Greek culture, Greek language, Greek knowledge, Greek wisdom, but also with a lot of local tolerance and incredible diversity. And the Ottomans, I don't know, as a Greek, you may have a bit more jaundiced view of the Ottomans than I do. I rather like the Ottomans in a lot of ways. But they had, of course, multiple minority communities who lived peacefully. That is why His All Holiness, the Greek Orthodox Patriarch Bartholomew, lives in Istanbul, Constantinople, and keeps his throne as the Patriarch of Greek Orthodoxy, or the All Ecumenical Patriarch, I should say, because the Ottomans kept all sorts of communities within the Ottoman Empire. And you can see these minority communities till today, local religion, local language, local cultures. It's quite wonderful. And that, I would say, is your point, that lots of wars, but actually the fact that the diversity has remained for 2 millennia plus means that this wasn't mass extinctions, genocides, attempts to impose one faith or one religion. And the Jewish community in today's modern Iran was not forced out by the Iranians. It was pulled out by the Zionist movement of Israel, which tried to bring everyone to Israel and depleted all of these ancient, long-standing, traditional Jewish communities. And I find that very, very sad, actually, because that diversity is an incredible cultural strength, but also an economic strength because of the trading systems.
And that brings me to the point about Israel, because, of course, Israel can become a part of this system. As I said, a system where everybody learns to live with everybody else. Tensions exist. And, of course, the point is that in the modern world, the kind of tensions that used to exist in the Middle East, the wars, which are usually wars between local dynasties, they're not exactly the same as European wars, if you know your medieval history of this part of the world well. That period of war, anyway, is obsolete, but the trade is not. And I myself, and I was very, very impressed by that meeting in Riyadh. Actually,
I was too.
I mean, everybody came together. Erdogan was there. Assad was there. The Saudis were there. Everybody was there. And they were all talking. The Iranians were there. And they were all talking together. And they were all talking together as a region, as a place where, and they were coming up with sophisticated political points. And I have to say, I felt that this does provide a real opening and a future, both for a political settlement of this crisis, which in my opinion is the ultimate crisis behind all the others in the Middle East, and also for the potential economic and social development of this region. If they can all come together and work together, and almost just about there doing it, then all of these synergies that do exist in the Middle East can finally start coming together, and then we could start to think of the Middle East in a completely different way.
It is absolutely the case. And the utter tragedy of what's happening right now, beyond the human disaster that Israel is causing, is that there is a clear path to peace. No question about it. The Israeli line, which I've heard for more than 50 years, there's no one to talk to on the other side, is such BS. There's no other way to put it, because the other side keeps saying, we want peace, we want normal relations, but you have to respect the fact that there are the Palestinian people who have political rights that need to be observed. It's really as simple as that. And when you look at this, and it is the terrible frustration, what's stopping that in Israel? What's stopping that is two different groups. One that happens to be in power right now, but there really is a group of zealots who believe, as a matter of theology, that all the land is promised to the Jews, and it's in the book of Joshua, and this is ours, no matter who happens to be there. And, it's a completely unacceptable view, an extraordinarily dangerous one. It is not the majority view in Israel, but it is a powerful view. And the way Israeli politics works, which is to give added weight to small groups that tip the balance to majorities in multi-party coalitions, they have a loud voice. And some of these people, like Smotrich in the cabinet, who's the finance minister, are vulgar and destroying Israel because of their Well, a kind of genocidal intent, actually. So that's one group. The other group says, no, for security, we dare not risk making peace. And the stupid thing that they did, of course, but it was very premeditated, and it played games with the first group and won their support politically, was the settlements process after the 1967 war, when the secularists said, we don't trust Palestinians to have a state, so we're going to put Israeli settlements in Palestinian territory. And this was, to the famous expression back in 1970, was to put facts on the ground. And now there are more than 400,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank, and there are another 200 to 250,000 in East Jerusalem. And it's facts that have made peace so much harder to achieve. But the main point, from my point of view, is these settlements are illegal. They have been declared illegal repeatedly by the Security Council. And so I want the Security Council to vote a two-state solution along the 4th of June, 1967 borders, like it is declared for more than 50 years, and get on with peace. And Israel would find that it has plenty of neighbors to do business with, to have peaceful relations with, to have tourism with, and every other thing. But they need to stop the zealots who don't see this way, and they need to have some self-understanding that the other side has been talking about peace for decades. Israelis haven't wanted to hear it. And the United States has basically, unconditionally backed Israel until today. Let's be clear, whatever Blinken and others are saying about protecting civilians is a total sham, because it's American bombs dropping on Gaza every day right now. So this is not Americans protecting anything. They know perfectly well what they're doing. And that brings us back to the US side and also to Britain and the European imperial side. There is something about the evangelical religious view that has said we can control these things. And it's a little less tolerant. The fundamentalist evangelical Christian view in the United States, which is probably the most pro-Zionist part of American politics, at least alongside the Jewish community. But that view is, again, a kind of God-given, we have the right to rule view. And that is not what peaceful coexistence is about. Peaceful coexistence is about mutual respect, not the belief that one is the chosen one to rule in a particular place or to rule every place.
I wanted to shift a bit out of the Middle East. Is this okay? But still, it's an economic question, I guess, because a big thing happening now this week, of course, was the Chinese meeting with the EU. I think this was the first time they really met since the pandemic, and it kind of had the same issues where because you spoke previously about the mindset in the United States, but it's a similar challenge now in Europe, I feel, because globalization is turning out very differently than many of the EU leaders suggested. It was supposed to be one which was Western-centric, and of course now the key challenge or a concern, I guess, from Brussels would be that the Europeans are becoming very dependent on China, but China not so much dependent on Europe. So this asymmetry is something that's spooking, I think, the Europeans. So the key language you now hear from the EU would be de-risking, decoupling. But again, this is a dilemma for the Europeans, because if the Europeans would sever themselves from China, sever themselves from Chinese technologies and resources, like they cut themselves off Russian resources, it would make the European less economic competitive, less prosperous, and also their dependence then would increase on the United States, which would effectively make them more politically obedient. So this is not a good option. But on the other side, if they accept more economic connectivity with China, the concern is that the dependence would grow. So they have been looking for ways out. Well, one of them would be, hey, how about we put some sanctions on China where it fits us? But then, of course, the Europeans are very offended when the Chinese retaliate, because this is supposed to be a one-way tool. So, they try to frame it in human rights because this is a good way of legitimizing one-sided sanctions. But again, the Chinese doesn't appear to want to have anything to do with it. The Europeans, for example, cite the treatment of Uyghurs, but at the same time, von der Leyen doesn't want to even call for ceasefire when the Israelis are, carpet bombing Gaza. So this doesn't really work. They're also trying to blame China for supporting Russia, even though, of course, the Europeans had a lot to do with provoking this war, and now also sending all these weapons. So China pretty much took the same position as the majority of the world population, which was, not supporting Russia's invasion, but also not supporting NATO's proxy war. Anyways, my point is, or questions, I guess, would be, how do you see this? How would Europe overcome this dilemma of, not wanting to become too dependent on China? Because, for example, to look at the electric car market, that the Europeans simply can't compete with the Chinese. If the Chinese cars are coming here, electric cars especially, then there's no room for the European market, because on a high quality, low cost Chinese cars versus the lower quality, higher priced European ones, the Europe would deindustrialize simply because Europe's no longer competitive. But again, going against the Chinese is also not a great solution. So what would your advice be to the Europeans? Ideally, that would have become before this meeting.
Yeah, first, I don't think Europe or the United States can ever again talk about human rights the way they do. This claim Xinjiang is a genocide, which was absurd, completely fatuous to begin with, just a debating point or a talking point. And then when a real genocide's taking place, they don't do anything. It's right before our eyes. Mass slaughter, mass killings, mass ethnic cleansing, and they suck their thumbs. They don't do anything. So all of these arguments that have been used are phony geopolitical narrative arguments. They're games. They're not real. And some people may think they're making real arguments, but they should understand that the governments are making phony arguments. And I took this on with the U.S. State Department when it talked about a genocide in Xinjiang without providing even one paragraph of backup, by the way. It's just games. So they should attend to the genocide that they're a party to, which is the one taking place in Gaza right now, and get this war stopped immediately. Now, when it comes to China, basically what's happening is that van der Leyen is just following U.S. instructions. I don't even think that this is a European view. This is the American view, falling behind your leader. And I blame Europe for constantly falling in behind the United States, because it's falling further and further behind by doing so. It's just absolute. Look at the trap that the U.S. got Europe into vis-a-vis Ukraine. Complete trap. Of course, the Europeans are not completely innocent of this. They watched the overthrow of Yanukovych. They went along with it. Why doesn't it? And the European leaders privately said things to me. Oh, yes, you're right, it's NATO. And then they say the opposite the next day. So I've heard the hypocrisy directly to me. I mean, to me, they tell me one thing, they say something publicly the next day. They're just following the U.S. Look, one day the United States decided Huawei is an enemy. Now, why? To my mind, because if it's a U.S. system, they can spy on me. But if it's a Chinese system, they can't spy on me so easily. So I trust Huawei equipment for my privacy more than I trust American equipment, for sure, because I know what Ed Snowden explained to me, by the way, in a 8-hour face-to-face discussion once about what my own government's doing to me. So, but as soon as the U.S. said it, oh, the Europeans have to cut out Huawei everywhere. You know, they just follow the U.S. lead. And van der Leyen's not the most clever person I've ever seen. It's not like there really are some original ideas there. And European foreign policy is shambolic right now. And Germany, sad to say, has really nobody has done more damage in peacetime to the German economy than the Greens, and Scholz letting them do it. And this is all very sad. So my advice to the Europeans: trade with China, keep good relations with China, improve your vehicles, of course. Don't be late. But Europe's pretty clever. The Europeans like a good quality of life, and they have it. Europe has the highest quality of life on the planet, the shortest working hours, the highest living standards, the longest vacation time, the longest life expectancy. The Chinese work a lot longer hours, a lot harder, and so on. That's part of the trade-off. But I think Europe gets its high living standards by being clever, well-educated, technologically sophisticated, and yes, Europe should have a more strategic view. It fell behind, look, Europe makes the leading advanced chips in the world, but it's all under U.S. control. Why doesn't Europe have its own control over ASML chip making capacity? No, the U.S. dictates everything. This is Europe's mistake right now. Europe's interest is not U.S. hegemony. Europe's interest is a peaceful, sustainable world, and meeting China literally halfway on the Eurasian continent. If Europe had a good investment program, it would be investing fast rail out to somewhere in central Russia or out to Samarkand, and China would be investing in fast rail westward, and we would meet in the middle and celebrate the 21st century Silk Road, which after all is the whole idea of, and that would bring prosperity to everybody. China is not going to invade Europe. China is not a threat to Europe. Period.
I completely agree. I mean, the idea that trade is a geopolitical threat, because that's what it amounts to, that trading with China is somehow conjuring up some kind of geopolitical threat. The trading with Russia was a geopolitical threat. It is so completely misconceived. It is so profoundly wrong. And you could see that what's happening is that some people, it just go back to what you were saying about the dollar at the start of the program, some people want to use these trade instruments as geopolitical instruments themselves.
By the way, this is exactly Jake Sullivan's sophomoric idea. And it's sophomoric in the sense that you would expect to read it in a sophomore essay. But they're actually putting it into policy in the U.S. that we need to weaponize trade. We need to weaponize the dollar. He wrote about this in the campaign in 2020. I thought it was a lousy article. I couldn't imagine it would become actual American policy. But the thing that I could never imagine is that the Europeans would stop thinking like they have and just follow along with the U.S. And this is really the big mistake.
Yeah. Professor Sachs, we've had you for, it's been an absolutely phenomenal program. We've talked about China and the Middle East and Europe. But I think because we've pivoted back to Eurasia, perhaps I'm going to suggest that we finish. Perhaps, Glenn, you've got something to say about Eurasia, because this is something that you've been studying and following very closely. You just met Professor Sachs talked about the Chinese and the Europeans building their railway lines and meeting. Well, why could we not do that? Isn't that exactly what was offered And wouldn't it have been a great thing if it had happened? And wasn't that what Putin was advising and saying we should do? And isn't that essentially what Xi Jinping is telling us, the Europeans, to do? So over to you, Glenn.
No, I don't really have any much more to add, but I was thinking the same, that it seems a lot of our policies in this, greater Eurasian space from the Atlantic to the Pacific is very contradictory, because we're always very worried that, China's going to be this central power which everyone will be dependent on. But at the same time, we're sanctioning the Russians, so the Russians become more reliant on China. We're going after the Iranians, so the Iranians are going more to China. So it seems like the solution, are concerned that the world, all roads will go to China, could be solved by ending a lot of this sanctions war, because in this way, the Iranians have the same interest. They want to diversify their economic connectivity. They don't want to put all their eggs in one basket where they could be taken advantage of. They want to, connect with Europe. They want to connect with Russia. They want to connect with China. And this is, I think, a lot of what you see across this Eurasian space. It's about decentralizing and diversifying to prevent everything from being decided from one center, which allows it to be used as a political weapon, which allows economic connectivity, which should be a source of peace, to again become a economic weapon. So I think,
and maybe we could end with just one more terrible example of this that shows all that's wrong and all that could be right, and that is Italy just renounced participation in the Belt and Road Initiative. And this is quite fascinating, because Italy, back in 2019, knew that trade with China is a good thing for Italy, because the Chinese love Italian brands, and the Italians have stylish brands, and the Chinese love it. And it brings a lot of income, a lot of wealth to Italy. And so Italy signed up, as it should, to be part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Well, just a couple of months ago, Prime Minister Meloni was called to Washington and was told by Biden, you've got to get out of this. And dutifully, Italy has told the Chinese, we are leaving the Belt and Road Initiative, and then we still want trade with China. We don't want to be misunderstood, and so forth. But they left. Why did they leave? Not because even intrinsic fear of China, not because it was hurting the Italian economy, not because Italy lacked things to sell to China. No, they left for one simple reason. The United States told them to do so. Well, I would put it a different way. They would like, I believe, nothing more than for the U.S. to become embroiled in a war with Iran. This is, I think, part of the goal. A wider war, we shouldn't think, is something that Israel is trying to avoid. It may well be something that Israel is trying to provoke. This is rather typical of, I don't know who the client is. I was going to say a client state manipulating a great power. I'm not sure who really the client is here, but Israel manipulates the United States, and it's happy it's got those aircraft carriers in the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, and now it is hoping, I think, that this could be the chance of Netanyahu's long-held desire that the United States would join a war against Iran. So we shouldn't think of this as a miscalculation on their part. Of course, it would be, again, unimaginably horrific. It could escalate into everything because it could bring in other superpowers, and probably would bring in Russia. Who knows what would happen? And let's be clear, there are lots of fools in the U.S. that also won't mind a wider war. We've got a warmongering group in the Senate Lindsey Graham types and others who always want expanded war. So we shouldn't think of this as a miscalculation. We should think of this as a provocation. If it's maybe the ethnic cleansing will work, maybe it will lead to a wider war. Either way, not so bad, says Israel. Of course, their real miscalculation is a different one, and I think it is a very serious one. They're losing the United States. Israel is losing the United States. They don't get that. Just like Biden can't imagine doing anything against Israel, the Israeli leaders think they own the Congress and the U.S. political system, and that is coming to an end, and they do not get that. Just like our Congress doesn't understand our students, Israel certainly doesn't understand what's happening inside the United States right now. And Israel can't go on a day with this without the United States backing it in munitions and backing it diplomatically and geopolitically. So I do think Israel's making a huge miscalculation. I think they're making a cruel calculation to start with, of course, but they're making a huge miscalculation, but not exactly the one that you're pointing to. They're making a miscalculation that they have the United States in their pocket, so they can basically think of the U.S. military as theirs to throw against whatever enemy they want. That is a falsehood. They're going to learn the hard way. I think, in fact, if this continues in this horrific way, the two-state solution really will be gone, and Israel's very survival in the long term will be deeply threatened by the approach that Israel has taken. I see no disaster greater than Netanyahu. He's really a piece of work that has done untold damage to Israel in his tenure as prime minister.
And it wouldn't be the first time.
Well, he sees the end possibly coming.
For himself.
Jim, go ahead, please.
Well, he sees the end possibly coming, but it's his life's work preventing a Palestinian state. Exactly. And one of the things you brought up, and you may be right about all of this is planned. I don't like to engage in conspiracy theories, but was it all planned in order to lead to another Nakba where Palestinians could be expelled out of Israel? And certainly some cabinet ministers have basically proposed that, saying that Western countries should accept Palestinians in to give them shelter so that they have a future in another place, because they don't want them to have a future. But you tried to talk a little bit before the United Nations about what we need to do to rebuild. The day, even if, let's just suppose that there is a ceasefire coming, and what do we do on day 2? Gaza is all but gone. You talked about getting 10% of the defense budgets of leading countries around the globe to invest in a sustainable reconstruction of Gaza and the Palestinian occupied territories. But, how do you get people to go along with that? Because remember, when they're doing deficit spending, somebody's benefiting, meaning Raytheon, at Omnia. They're benefiting from all of these wars. And if you stop that, if you take away 10% of that, that is a lot of money.
People are going to suffer for years and decades out of what is happening in these days, without question. The loss of life, but the destruction of hundreds of thousands of homes, the dislocation of 2 million people so far. This is devastating, and the destruction in Gaza will have a price tag that under any circumstances the world will not cover. So people will suffer and will be dislocated and impoverished and without any ultimate solution or compensation to this. But what will happen, and it will drive me crazy, by the way, thank God the day the fighting stops, then we'll have a donors conference. And the governments will get together and say, oh, we're going to commit tens of billions of dollars to rebuild what was just destroyed. And it's so stupid that we behave this way, because a lot of my life and career is about trying to raise any funds for impoverished people, getting kids in school, building health clinics. And the idea that you bomb places and then throw the tens or hundreds of billions of dollars at what you just willfully destroyed, but you would never come up with such funding for just helping poor people in the first place, is the reality. And remember, it's as we muse about who's going to rebuild Gaza, and the answer is nobody is going to rebuild much of it. The Ukrainians, they actually hold meetings thinking, oh, we're going to have a $750 billion fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Yeah, good luck with that one too. So this is tragedy compounding tragedy. Of course, we have a doctrine in general in economics, an incentive doctrine, which is the polluter pay principle, which is you make the damage, you pay. That's how our courts work also. If it's a trespass or a noxious tort, a public nuisance is the legal term. Israel should pay for this. It destroyed Gaza. It should pay for this. Well, let's try that one. That one's not going to go too well either. But that is that's the principle that should apply, so that a government thinks twice before it destroys another place.
So it's interesting because it moves us. There's a couple of areas I'd like us to cover as we're kind of nearing the end of this great, interview, Jeff. One area is the economics of war and peace, and I'd love to. For you to comment on the juxtaposition that we're seeing now. On the one hand, you've got the utter destruction of Gaza, which is a fairly small place. I mean, Gaza is not this massive World War II kind of Marshall Plan for Western Europe. It's just basically the size, less than the size of Manhattan, I mean, in the grand scheme of things. However, on the other end, you've got a damaged Israeli economy that's basically shedding hundreds of millions of dollars on a daily basis. By an estimate, it's about $12 billion worth of economic, well, that's not opportunity cost, that's direct cost to the war so far in the 60 days. Add to that the opportunity cost for the 300,000 reservists. And
the destruction of the shipping now, which is blocked in the Red Sea, and ships turning away, all of that.
And you're seeing a reduction. Even Israelis are starting to leave, which is fascinating. I was reading somewhere that between 300 and 400,000 Israeli, presumably productive ones that don't want to waste their time on nonsensical wars, they're going to go to the West and be productive and safe with their families and stuff. So you've got that also going up. And in parallel, and I know you were just in Doha not long ago in the Gulf, and you're seeing this unbelievable wealth creation that is happening in Saudi, where essentially there's been a doubling of productivity just by allowing women to enter into the workforce. And you've got, all that going on in the Gulf, just a complete buildup of that. And if we look at some of the demographics, we're looking at maybe 20 years ago, the Arab world was about 220 million. Now we're about 470 million. And by some projections, the MENA region is going to be 770 million by 2050. And you're seeing this juxtaposition, of these stories. How do you see that playing out, And can really Israel sustainably, from an economic perspective, still sell itself as being this strategic beachhead for the United States at a time when the United States, if it so wanted, has an entire region that's larger than the actual landmass of the United States itself, with potential 770 million people that it can alienate or pacify? I mean, how do you see that in your mind playing out?
Well, I think there are a number of issues here. First, this is very, very costly for Israel, and that's good because maybe it means that Israel will stop what it's doing. Israel cannot afford, ultimately, the Greater Israel approach, which is the approach of ethnic cleansing or continued apartheid over the West Bank and Gaza. It doesn't know that yet. It can't sustain U.S. backing for that. It can't sustain the isolation that will come from that. It can't sustain the ongoing fighting that will come from that. So that's one part. More generally, war is, a good business for 5 companies in the military-industrial complex in the United States, but for the world, it's a totally rotten business, of course. Not only does it create tragedy, but it creates mass destruction that is extremely costly to pick up, and the direct outlays on armaments worldwide now is probably $2.5 to $3 trillion. The estimate is about $2.5 trillion, of which the United States is typically measured at $1 trillion, but it's actually much larger than that when you count all of the budget item lines, maybe up to $1.5 trillion a year. So this is all costly, all wasteful. I every day invoke Isaiah, the 8th century prophet whose words are on the wall just across the street of the UN on First Avenue, chapter 2, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations won't make war on nations, neither will they learn war anymore. He's speaking economically. We should be transforming our armaments into productive activities. This is unbelievable waste, stupidity, and danger, what we're doing. Again, these wars could end essentially immediately, because I also like to quote Karl von Clausewitz, the war theorist in Germany after the Napoleonic Wars, who said that war is the continuation of politics with other means. And his point was that war is a kind of politics. So I say, look to the underlying politics. The underlying politics of the war in Gaza is, will there be a Palestinian state or will there be Greater Israel? Well, the only answer that can possibly lead to peace is a Palestinian state. And we should cut to the chase and go straight there. As I mentioned, when we look at the war in Ukraine, the underlying politics is the United States trying to push its military to the border of Russia, to surround Russia in the Black Sea, an idea that Zbigniew Brzezinski described in detail in 1997 and that the U.S. has been trying to carry out. It's led to disaster. Again, it's politics. So if we want to stop the war, it's not military that will do it. It's politics that will end these wars, and they could end immediately. We'd save a fortune. The people in the world would be hugely benefited. Of course, those under the bombs first and foremost, but all of us would benefit. Maybe Lockheed or Raytheon shares would go down a little bit. That would be just fine.
Can I ask a question about Lebanon?
Go ahead, Tariq. And there is one question I wanted to get a comment from Jeffrey on. This
about Lebanon and the situation in Lebanon and the resolution, UN resolution 1701. Now it's back on the table, and Amos 16 is being back and forth trying to implement borderline and the resolution 1701. Any information on that and the IMF plan for recovery of Lebanon? What do you have for Lebanon? What do you like to say for the Lebanese audience about these two topics?
I
need another hour.
I wish I could help you on that more specifically, but precisely while that debate has been going on, I was at COP28 and then in Ethiopia, just got back yesterday. So my consultations with diplomats on that start this week.
Would you comment on COP28? What's your take on it? And do you think, as is being reported, it's at least an acceptable move forward? Did it disappoint you in terms of its reach, or were you actually surprised given that it was held in in an OPEC, at the end of the day, in an OPEC nation, and something did come out of it at the end.
I was glad that it was held in the Gulf region, and I think the president of COP28, Sultan Al Jaber, did a very good job, and the outcome is, as these things go, good. Now, I say as these things go because there's paper and then there's reality. And the paper document that came out is a step forward, definitely. The reality is that the big powers are all directed at these war and peace issues, not at this climate issue. And until we end these wars, we're not going to get the kind of real political capital to decarbonize the world economy, to face up to the financing challenges, and so forth. So I go to COP meetings, all these conference of the parties each year, and they're big, interesting jamborees. There were nearly 100,000 people there. A true measure of massive world interest, massive business interest, massive civil society interest, massive scientific interest. But in terms of superpower politics, that's not where the real answers are. And right now, the superpowers are in conflict and in war, and we've got to end that so that they focus on something absolutely real, which is making the planet viable from a climate point of view for the 21st century.
Well, Jeff, I think, I don't know if any of my colleagues has any more questions, but I do have one last question for you. And it's something that I heard you say, which was, obviously I've known you for a long time, but it's still impressive. It's you stated, and I quote, "Peaceful coexistence is about mutual respect, not to believe that one is the chosen one to rule in a particular place or to rule in every place." And I thought that was a really interesting quote, because you kind of, in many ways, highlight the aspirations of a lot of people who are more on the peace side of things, realizing the sacrifices that might need to be taken. But I'd love for you to comment on this, and whether you look at the next few weeks, months, years in an optimistic tone, or whether having been in development and having been in the throes of geopolitics and the UN for such a long time, whether you've reached a point where you're looking at it more from a pessimistic perspective or an optimistic one.
Let me mention two things. First, immediately in the Israel-Gaza war, those Israelis, and that includes this current government and the cabinet, that believe that Israel has the right, and they would say a God-given right, to rule over the Palestinian people or over the Palestinian territories, is the essence of this conflict. And it's unacceptable. And the people of Israel need to live side by side with the Palestinians in peace, and it's perfectly possible to do. But they have to give up their aspiration to rule all of the land. And some Israelis believe that's what the book of Joshua gave them, or some biblical interpretation. And it is, has to be put aside. Nobody has that right. Not from God, not from a book of the Bible. People have to live decently, and they have to respect each other. And that's the only way we can survive on this planet. When it comes to the United States, it's even more grandiose. The United States ideology is, and Biden repeated it recently, the U.S. is the indispensable country. It's the country the world looks to for leadership. This is false. It was always false. But in the heyday of the 1990s, when the Soviet Union ended, maybe there was maybe that delusion could be at least a little understood. Is the U.S. really the country the whole world's looking to right now, when it stands alone against the rest of the world? Of course not. the U.S. needs to learn to cooperate. It needs to learn to put aside its own delusion of hegemony. And there are leaders, in fact, it includes this very government, Biden, Sullivan, Blinken, Nuland, who really believe in U.S. hegemony. Well, it's a nonsense. It's a fiction. It's worse than an anachronism, because an anachronism would imply that it was maybe once true. It was never true. And so this is the similar kind of terrible falsehood that needs to be put aside if we're going to get to peace.
Doctor, last word. Is the UN time for reshuffling, time to restructuring, time for new laws for the UN to be more effective, to be able to defend these people? It's time for change in the UN?
Well, I love the UN, first of all, as frustrating as it is, because it is the place where the world meets, and it's the only place where the world meets. And when the world meets, it speaks with a huge voice, peace and justice for Palestine. So it's pretty impressive. Now, it has a voice, but it doesn't have an army. It doesn't have its own tax authority. It is a club of 193 nations. It was founded by nations. It was founded by nations. This is important. It's not global government. It's United Nations. And this is a bit of a problem. I'm in favor of more power, for example, some direct tax power, so that at the global level, we can get some funding for poor people or for emergencies or for other things that we need. Now, next September, there will be a summit of the future at the UN. This is a once in a generation. In fact, it's the first time ever that such a summit has taken place. And Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called on the world, think about what we want and what we need for the balance of the 21st century. And we will meet the 22nd and 23rd of September. By then, hopefully, there will actually be some creative agreements reached about the kind of restructuring or strengthening of a new multipolar world and a stronger set of UN institutions that can work for the 21st century. So I'm a believer. I know in history, we've never had global governance. This is only the second attempt in all of world history to have this. The first was the League of Nations. It failed within a generation. The United Nations is 78 years old this year. It is, as I say, I love it, and it's incredibly frustrating that we can't solve more problems in the way we need to. But we should understand this is a new attempt in human history to have global scale governance. So I don't want us to give up on it. I don't want us to be cynical about it. I want us to fix things so that we can actually make it work.
Right now, we are seeing that the United States and Israel are, it seems that they are preparing to fight Yemen, Houthis. How serious is that in your opinion, and why they're doing this?
Well, the whole situation is very serious because there is no end game in sight. Israel is trying to impose solutions in the region that are unacceptable. First, domination over Palestine in an unconditional way through its military power backed by the United States, and it's making threats against other parts of the Middle East. So this could obviously spiral into a wider war very soon. And it's all premised on Israeli government policies that are, in my opinion, flagrantly against international law and international decency.
Why the United States, why the Biden administration, instead of going after negotiation, finding some political solution to this issue, they're prepared to do everything, whatever the Netanyahu administration is asking for?
This is neocon policy to fight wars anywhere and everywhere, to always escalate, and to believe that not only does might make right, but that might can solve political issues. It's pathetic, but it's not really different from other dimensions of U.S. policy. It's just blatant, flagrant arrogance and disregard for international law and disregard for what global opinion and American opinion say. After all, the world overwhelmingly has called for a ceasefire. And in the most recent UN General Assembly vote, it was 153 countries calling for a ceasefire, and the population of those countries is 89% of the world population. 10 countries opposed: the United States, Israel, and a few other small countries. The total population of those that opposed was 5%, of which 4% was the United States. So the U.S. was joined by 9 other countries that represented less than 1% of the world population. In other words, this is giving a finger, if I could put it crudely, to the rest of the world, saying, we don't care. We don't care what you say. We don't care what you call for. We don't care for peace. We'll do it the way we want to do it. This is not only the United States backing Israel, this is the United States alongside Israel, because Israel couldn't fight one day by itself. It needs the munitions every day from the United States, and it's getting them.
Yeah, you talk about ammunition. Jake Sullivan just recently said that they are taking care of this ammunition, these weapons that are sending to Israel, that they are not using against civilians. How
well, this is ridiculous. There are 18,000 dead minimum, 2 million displaced, hospitals, schools, basic physical infrastructure, apartment buildings, all destroyed. And even the New York Times, which is, of course, rabidly pro-Israel, and I mean pro-Israeli government policy, notes in an article today that a substantial proportion of the bombs are dumb bombs. They're not guided bombs. They even quote Mark Milley, the former chief of staff of the U.S. military, saying that this is wrong. You need to use guided missiles to avoid the civilian deaths and damage and injury. And of course, they're not doing that. Does Jake Sullivan know that? Of course, he knows that. This is part of a U.S. foreign policy that is as out of control as Israel's foreign policy. That's the problem.
The other issue that it's much more serious than Yemen is Hezbollah in the north. The Israelis, they were talking about if it was necessary, they want to attack Hezbollah. Hezbollah has the same rhetoric. How do you see right now the situation in that region?
It seems, although I don't have any direct evidence because I don't speak to the administration, they certainly don't speak to me, but it seems that the hardliners in Washington and the hardliners in Jerusalem in the Israeli government want a wider war. They're not taking steps to avoid a wider war. They seem to want a wider war. I think it's Netanyahu's dream that the United States goes to war with Iran. Because if Israel could get the United States to take out Iran, and that's their idea, imagine that. But all of this is grotesque cynicism and miscalculation as well, because what could happen would be devastating for the whole world if this continues to escalate. And they're playing with that. You notice that Israel hasn't taken one moment, not one measure, not one iota of an approach towards diplomacy. Nothing. No call for diplomacy. Incredible disrespect for the United Nations, disrespect for the rest of the world. Obviously saying every day we don't care. about the rest of the world. We don't care about diplomacy. I think one of the things that will happen is that support in the United States for Israel will collapse. Actually, it's already collapsing among young people, and I think the collapse will be more widespread. Even that doesn't necessarily stop the U.S. government from doing what it's doing by any means, because foreign policy is hardly an area of democratic deliberation. It's a small cabal that runs things, that controls the military. They don't really ask for permission. But we see in Ukraine how an exasperated public finally has some influence on some members of Congress, enough that there isn't just a blank check for more armaments. This is very surprising given how much our Congress likes to write checks to the military industrial complex. But the public is pretty much disgusted, and Biden's support is falling sharply. We have an election year this year, so it's possible that the exasperation clearly expressed in opinion survey after opinion survey will finally result in some action by the U.S. government to put a stop to this massive devastation.
At the end of the day, what is so important is how these actions would benefit the people of Israel. What's going on in the mind of the Netanyahu administration? How possibly they can think that all these actions would benefit Israelis?
They are engaged in ethnic cleansing right now, and that is the goal of this government. This government is an extreme right-wing government. Netanyahu's party, the Likud, has, since its charter in 1977, demanded one state of Israel, commanding all of the territories of Palestine, as well as the 1967 border Israel. In other words, the land from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River should be Israel. That's the policy. That's the policy across the cabinet. That's the policy of these religious Zionist parties. For example, the finance minister Smotrich and the defense minister Gallant, who's Likud, and the interior minister Ben-Gvir, who is another party calling for, quote, greater Israel. That's their policy, is that there should never be a Palestine. There should never be Palestinian political rights. This is Israel. And a lot of the public supports that. And a lot of the public follows the line of the administration, the Israeli government, that is, that the only way to safety is to smash Palestine. And so the situation is going to continue, I think, if it's a matter of internal Israeli policy. But it's something that Israel can't do for a day without the United States. And the U.S. has no interest, no national interest, no ethical interest, no geopolitical interest in being an accessory to mass murder.
How do you see the left, the center, political parties in Israel? Because the left is so weak right now. Why the Netanyahu administration during all these years did this to the left, to the center?
There's basically no left in Israel. It's a few seats in the Knesset, in the parliament. The Israeli political scene has shifted to the far right over the years. It didn't just start on October 7. This is something that's been going on for years. Netanyahu represents and those parties represent a larger viewpoint. Israel's basically divided between those who oppose a Palestinian state because they think that God gave them all the land, and they're going to assert their biblical claim. And those who follow the propaganda that say, well, even if it was right to have two states, there's no one on the other side that would accept that. And so better we have to use violence and force. That's the only realistic thing to do. But voices that say we need to solve these problems through following international law and through justice barely exist in Israel right now. I think this is a terrible, grave danger to Israel's survival because the legitimacy internationally is plummeting. And I personally don't think that the American people really have much interest in being a party to this. The American people, to the extent that they signed up with Israel, signed up to a two-state solution. They did not sign up to some biblical vision of a greater Israel that controls millions of Palestinian people. They didn't sign up for that.
Putin's recent press conference, he was talking about Odessa. He said that Odessa is a Russian city. It's a huge change in his view. The United States could have saved Odessa for Ukraine if they were going to negotiate with Russia before. How do you see the situation right now in Ukraine? Is there any will in the Biden administration to go after negotiations?
No. In 2010, 2011, 2013, Russia's demands vis-a-vis Ukraine were that Ukraine should be neutral. That's all. And Russia negotiated with the government of Ukraine a lease till the year 2042 for Sevastopol naval base. There were no demands for annexation. There were no demands for territory. There was no claim on Crimea. There was simply a pragmatic approach. Don't join the U.S. military alliance, and our military base, our naval base, which has been in Sevastopol, Crimea, since 1783, should remain there, and we want a long-term lease for that, which President Yanukovych negotiated. That's all the demands. Then the United States overthrew or was party to the overthrow of Yanukovych. Russia took back Crimea. Even then, there were no demands for the eastern Ukrainian regions, that is the Donbass. What Russia said was stop killing ethnic Russians, give autonomy to ethnic Russians, and that became the basis for the so-called Minsk I and Minsk II agreements. The Minsk II agreement did not call for independence of the Donbass or that Russia would annex the Donbass. It just said autonomy. And it was a position backed up unanimously by the UN Security Council. But the United States said, no, we don't care. It told Ukraine, you don't have to implement that. And so that was lost. Even as late as December 2021, Putin was not making demands for territory. He was calling for the Minsk agreements to be enforced, claiming Crimea and demanding that NATO stop enlarging. Well, the United States government is deaf to the interests of any other place in the world. They're so arrogant that the position is we don't have to listen to anything. And so when President Putin put a draft security agreement on the table based on those premises that NATO would not enlarge, that the Minsk agreement would be honored finally years after it was supposed to go into effect, Biden said, nah, we don't have to negotiate. Russia launched its special military invasion in March 2022, and by then, the Duma, the Russian parliament, had recognized eastern Ukraine as independent, Lugansk and Donetsk as independent, did not annex them. That came in September 2022. But in March, it recognized their independence, but Russia demanded Ukrainian neutrality and said on that basis there could be immediate peace. And Ukraine and Russia famously were close to an agreement on ending the war weeks after it had started. Weeks. And the United States said no. And Britain said no. We will not support you. You fight on. Hundreds of thousands of people, Ukrainian young men, have died since then. So this is about American foreign policy. And it's so sad. It is not just demands for territory by Russia. It is the fact that Russian demands keep rising in the context of continuing rejections from the United States. Definitely, the rhetoric has turned even more aggressive, but the White House is so stupid. Sorry, in the U.S., they don't understand anything. But what they certainly don't understand is that Biden should call Putin and say, we've got to stop this. We don't want to see all of Ukraine destroyed. But you're right. We should never have tried to expand NATO. That was really stupid. And you told us that since 2007. That's the call that's needed. But I don't think Biden's up to it. And certainly his neocon team opposes that very premise. Fight on, basically kidnap young people off the streets of Ukrainian cities and throw them to the front line where they're dying by the hundreds, sometimes 1,000 or more per day. That's the policy.